Welcome back. This is another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. I, as always, am your host, Howard Holton. This week, I'm here with TRob, the COO of Domino. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Howard?
I'm doing well. So I want to warn our audience that we are once again going to talk about AI.
Lovely.
Right? If you're tired of hearing about AI, don't turn off quite yet. We're going to take a little bit of a different view. We're not going to talk about AI in general. We are specifically going to talk about the hard topic, and that is AI governance. So if you're tired of buzzword bingo and don't want to hear about governance, then this may not be the podcast for you. However, any organization that is going down the path of AI needs to have governance front and center. So it's probably worth listening, even if you're not super thrilled and excited when we start down the wicked exciting path of governance and compliance and legal.
Regulatory regimes.
Right?
Here we go.
Right? Especially poorly defined or completely undefined regulatory regimes, right? Yep. There is no government at this point that really has defined what their AI governance policy or policies will be, because, and I would argue this is probably the most difficult set of policies to write. Right?
I think so.
There's a huge danger because the market is evolving so quickly. You can't set barriers that prevent new entrants, even though all the big AI companies would love nothing more because they're already there, right? They've already made the investment and got away in the wild, wild west, right? So if you overregulate the wild, wild west, you're going to prevent new entrants, but also you're going to slow the pace of innovation, right? And on a global stage, any country that slows the pace of innovation at this point puts themselves behind every country that doesn't even have a policy.
Yep. And in Europe, as is typical, has taken the lead in this, which is, I think, normally where they are with respect to governance and regulation, and sure enough with the EU AI Act. But you're absolutely right, because when I talk to folks, while there's some sort of high level compliance required in terms of listing out their models and ascertaining which use case, how dangerous the use case is, much more of them are just thinking about, well, I'm going to wait for this to trickle down into the specific regulators who are relevant to my industry and figure out what is going to happen there. And we're years away from that, and that's where the hard work happens, is industry and the regulators collaborating together to figure out, like, well, what actually is going to help here. Not sort of the high level perspective. Not that the EU AI Act isn't a good step, but it's nowhere near sort of resolving the problem.
Sure, it is not complete, and let's be clear, right? GDPR is not complete. GDPR is only half of a proposed regulation. Yep. GDPR deals with kind of the big, crunchy corporate side. There's still the individual side that still hasn't been ratified and written because there is so much change. They really can't kind of get their arms completely wrapped around it.
Yep.
Good compliance is really, really, really hard to write, right? Good compliance legislation, governance legislation is really hard to write. And it has to have the right amount of teeth. I was a SOC trainer when that became a thing. I was trained by a company to help them develop their stuff around SOC. Like I didn't become a SOC consultant. That would have sucked.
Yep. And I did SOC 2 for a hedge fund, and so I know the feeling.
It's terrible.
Rough.
It's terrible. Well, it's also toothless.
Yeah.
SOC is toothless, right? HIPAA is almost toothless. In the first year of GDPR, there was one company that was fined more than all of the HIPAA fines in history up till that point. Right. And so that's the other thing companies are doing, right? I was a GDPR consultant, a privacy consultant for companies that would be affected by that. And the response that I was getting from a lot of companies was, we're just going to wait and see. What do you mean you're going to wait and see? Well, we did all this stuff for SOC. SOC was toothless. Now we want to see is there teeth here. Second, it showed teeth. Everybody panicked. Oh, crap. We're now in trouble because they're effectively what the EU Commission said was, we're tired of your bullshit.
Yep.
Right. And the concern that I have is AI has the opportunity for missteps. However, if today you keep two tenets in mind, the first tenet is, how do I protect my organization from unnecessary risks that can be mitigated? And the second is, how do I be a good custodian of the data that I'm entrusted with?
Yep.
If we just do those two things, then every step that you take from there is likely to put you in a better, more aligned position with any governance and compliance requirements that do get released.
Yep.
You'll already have the frame of mind, and then it's just a matter of tuning.
Absolutely. And I think I'm an optimist in this regard, because what I would say is, and I'll maybe talk about sort of a slightly narrower group of people that I get to deal with all the time. And these are folks, these are organizations that have sort of modeling and data science and statistics and a whole history of computational type decision making at the core of their business. At the end of the day, these are organizations that think a lot about risk and are not, are always trying to strike the balance of, well, how do I protect my business? How do I protect my customers? How do I make that not too burdensome in sort of a regulatory sense? And of course, everybody loves to complain about the audits that are required and all that. But the reality is they do it. They know it makes sense. They know they have to do it. And what's at stake is, much more customer value and much more revenue and much more risk. And I think that's a good driver. Like I'm a believer in the public-private partnership for development of regulation. And I think, I'm an optimist that, once we get through some of this high level view of, oh gosh, fear mongering around AI, we'll get down to brass tacks, and insurance companies will figure out, like, okay, there's ways we should and shouldn't use AI as part of pricing and part of claims and underwriting, and banks are going to think about it with respect to how they digest all the earnings reports and make that simpler. I mean, it's a little banal, but these are going to be sort of just refreshes to existing things that are there. And I'm an optimist in that I think there are smart people in these organizations figuring that out. I think they'll apply the same thing to governance for AI.
I think so. The beautiful part is there are huge organizations investing tremendous amounts of money in how to make money leveraging AI, not through AI, right? Like the companies making money through AI are Microsoft and Google and Domino, right?
Yep.
Vendors producing products that are AI-based products, right? That surround the ecosystem. I mean those that are using those type of products to further their business. And they are effectively right now a really useful kind of endless feedback loop on what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
They make everything public, right?
Of course.
But they do talk very clearly to their partners about what they're doing, who then can leverage that into kind of series of best practices, right? Their advisors, their consultants, and that sort of thing. And those are the kind of things that we want to capture, because not every organization is a level 3.5 to 4.5 on the maturity scale.
Exactly.
Right? Most of us are a level 0 or 1 on the enterprise Gen AI maturity model.
Yep.
Sorry to speak that way. I literally just got off back-to-back calls. We are building, I'm at, 400 pages of material on an enterprise Gen AI maturity model currently. So we are prepping to release something that were I still in the CIO seat, I would actually leverage to stand on. And that's kind of what we're trying to build in the model. But effectively, like that's the point that most companies are at. They're a 0, maybe they're a 1. Maybe they've played around a little bit. Maybe they have some sort of strategy, and maybe they're kind of going through and doing a bit of an assessment. But those are the people we want to talk about here for a few minutes. Like how do we help them avoid some of the risk that is inherent in doing things without knowing what you don't know, right?
Well, I think that part of that maturity conversation, the 0 to 1 sort of maturity level, kind of goes hand in hand with the coming or already here trough of disillusionment of what Gen AI can do, because we're not at the point where somebody's a level 3 maturity where they're constantly doing proactive change management on all their deployed Gen AI techniques, right? We're in a stage where we're still doing prototyping. We have hundreds of projects and are slowly going through figuring out, well, what's actually going to work or not. Now, whether you sum that up to disillusionment or whether you sum that up to, okay, well, we're just trying to figure out where this tool goes. Yeah, I think a lot of folks are in that stage, and certainly governance is an interesting concern. Like the risk is an interesting concern. I think there's an even simpler thing that a lot of people are running into as well, is like sort of the ROI and the cost, which in some regards is another governance concern. And
for sure.
And we certainly don't want organizations putting models out there that cost more than the value they create, or create negative value and lots of GPU
I would argue
costs.
we actually do. Right. I would argue we absolutely want organizations doing that. Right. And I'm not being facetious. It's just if you're not using AI today, if you're not playing with Gen AI today because you can't make money at it, you're missing the point.
Yep.
Right. Restrict the losses, but you should see it as an investment, not a point of profit today.
Yep.
Right? Value doesn't need to be profitable. Right. So think of it as an investment. You're starting a new business. When you start a new business, you dump a ton of money into it, hoping at some point this risk will pay off. This new market offering, this new position, this disruption you're bringing to the market will pay off, right? Organizations need to think about Gen AI that way. They need to think about they are VCs starting a new business within their existing business that will hopefully pay off, that will hopefully unicorn, if you will. The big challenge is if you just look at the economics change in cost of tokens over the last 24 months, it's like decimal places have moved more than once.
Yep.
Right. So don't look at it and go, well, this is too expensive, we're not going to do anything. No. How can we minimize the cost while maximizing the learning value?
Yeah. If anything, I think it's one thing that's also interesting too. Your comment about every company being a VC and think about the investment. I mean, the same thing was absolutely true of the internal software development regime that took instead of maybe 2 years to 20 years to sort of work itself through. But the cost there always, until sort of vendors built expensive software products to take a lot of the market share, but the cost there was always the people, right? And one of the things that's really nice with Gen AI is there's a very clear scoreboard, because a lot of the cost is directly proportional to how many things are you doing with it. And I think that's actually great. I think that highlights the ROI so readily for a lot of organizations, and that's a thing that we coach on and talk about with folks is, when you're thinking about building your portfolio, to your point, go have experiments and bets, go do interesting things, like come up with novel ways and novel problems. And that's good for your organization. That's good for your people. That's good for your innovation. That's good for your learning. But when the rubber meets the road, make a classic 2x2 of what's the cost and what's the value, and make the bubbles as big as the risk. And it's very easy to figure out quickly what's going to move the needle for you and what's going to be a boondoggle.
I actually think there's an even easier mechanic or metric that you can use, a rubric you can use to determine, is my AI project going to be a boondoggle? Make a bubble that is the size of the data set you want to work with, right? And then pick a shade of crayon from bright green to bright red with greens, yellows, and reds in between, and shade in the quality of the data that is in that data set. Right? Can you guarantee that there is no PII, that there is no proprietary data, that every single user has and should have access to that entire data set? Yep. That the quality is all of equal value, that you understand, that all the, just like the data quality checklist, right? If it's a perfect data set, bright green. If you go, oh crap, more than twice, it's probably bright red.
Yep.
Right. And I think if you think about it that way, and then you just go, cool, let's make the bubble smaller. Right? Until we get to the point that it's at least a shade of green. It doesn't need to be bright green, but at least it's a shade of green. What you'll find is this is actually a great way to manage costs. It's a great way to reduce risk. It's a great way to create a really kind of refined use case that also gives you a here's some things to do so we can also measure it. We can actually start tracking value, and we've mitigated some of the kind of big cost oopsies that go into it.
Yeah, I like that approach. I'll push a little bit because I think the thing that's missing from that, that's important is, when I think about a company applying AI or data science or anything like that, we always think about the decisions that are made, or the outputs that are produced, and that's where you really drive value, right? Like if you're automating some decision-making process and building a higher caliber of decision, that's going to be great for your business all day long, and that's what you want to do. By the same token, many of those decisions can have sort of big, small risk in a variety of different regimes, right? So making a decision to approve an auto loan or not has a very tangible risk, and you can go look at the the margin you're going to make and the price and all of that.
Sure.
I think when it comes to embedding AI in that, that's actually kind of an easy thing to go observe. I think the issue becomes when you have these more fringe use cases, fringe decision cases, where suddenly you've got a chatbot talking to a customer, and now you're talking about reputational risk that is not really measurable in any sort of classic sense, because you don't want to be in the New York Times for talking about something you shouldn't be. And I see a ton of hesitancy from folks. Like this is where the rubber meets the road with what they're putting out there. There's actually more willingness to put AI in some classic process that has good human in the loop, good traditional governance, and do marginal experimentation. Let's take this part of the process and try something different here. Let's mix this in with another, traditional model. But really a lot more worry and care about those sort of more catastrophic downsides. And I think the Gen AI has a step change in the risk here, because the whole hallucination issue really has just created a different type of problem that we haven't really experienced before. Like when you deal with traditional statistics, right? You have type 1, type 2 error, you look at ROC curve, like this is all well understood in some statistician capable person's mind. Hallucinations are a different sort of beast, more akin to HR management maybe than
there's no data scientist that can manage hallucinations.
Yeah.
A data scientist is your ultimate mathematician and statistician, and so they're really good at traditional AI issues, right? Hallucinations are a totally different thing and a totally different issue. Also, there is no system. Not that you don't know this, but there's no system that doesn't hallucinate. That is a Gen AI system. That is what they do. It's because it's inherent in the name. They're a large language model. They're not a large math model, a large statistics model, a large anything else. They're a large language model. They are a prediction engine for what is the word that comes next, or part of a word technically, to complete whatever the intent was that it tried to intuit from the prompt you gave it to begin with, right? So if it makes something up, that's actually not a bug. That is the feature. The feature is
entirely
language, right? The fact that we've kind of confused it ourselves is part of the problem. But I kind of want to go back to where I think you were going there, right? If your maturity is less than a 3.5, why are you doing things externally?
Right. Yeah. And there's a hard line there that you need to be really thoughtful about. And again, I'm an optimist. I believe in the intelligence and experience and ethics of the people in these organizations. And I see that hard line time and time again. Like there's a lot of unwillingness to cross the line with reputational and sort of customer impact, in so much as it's not governed by some other more traditional system. So,
right. So let's talk a little bit about AI governance, right? Because up till recently, any LLM work has kind of been the wild, wild west.
Totally.
right? I mean, LLMs are recent, right?
Mm-hmm.
No doubt. But really, AI governance is kind of 6 months of adoption,
Yep.
right? We don't have 5 years of LLM AI governance adoption,
Right.
right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. And before we started, right, I'm just going to say it: the competitor of ours that has the big G, right? They produce a wave, and they have a Gen AI wave, and they moved Gen AI backwards into the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah.
On their kind of hype cycle. Sorry, it's a hype cycle, not a wave.
Yeah.
And the reason they did that is they spent 2023 standing on stage telling everyone you have to do Gen AI. And companies went off and did Gen AI and went, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Right? We had car dealerships that sold a Tahoe for $1. We had car dealerships that were not Tesla.
Yep.
And not, I think the other one was Fisker, where the chatbot was convinced it worked for Tesla and then sold a Tesla car, and worked for Fisker and sold the Fisker car. And it was neither of those things were true, right? We had the Air Canada, where it hallucinated an entire bereavement policy. Then they got sued and went to court, right? And lost. They lost. Just I want to close the loop on that. They did not win.
Yeah.
And so that's been pulled back to the trough of disillusionment. And I think AI governance is the reason.
I'm not sure. This is where I'm going to be less of an optimist. I think it may be like fundamental to how these tools work. And here's what I don't know. When we talk about AI governance, there are not a lot of tools today. There's prompt engineering tools, there's observability tools, but almost everybody I talk to who's not trying to promote some new product they're developing, nobody's really figured out a solution to this. And nobody's even been able to really sort of imagine how it's going to happen. Now, look, I don't get to talk to people at OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, and I'm sure there are tons of incredibly smart people there working on that. Of course there are. Of course, if you can solve that problem, we're gonna take a major leap forward. And so they're all dutifully invested in doing that. But it's probably going to take a step change in how these models work. It's going to be a different type of tool, I think. I to your point about hallucinations being the feature, not the bug, there's no like special dial or special checking that's suddenly going to solve that. And so, in some sense, the governance, I think, is much less related to the governance of a particular algorithm or a particular tool. And it's really a people and process issue related to how do you govern where you're applying those technologies to your business decisions, to your which use cases, how they're touching customers, and that sort of thing. Now, what's really good about that is I think a lot of organizations have sort of a long history of thinking about that governance and have risk teams and have regulatory regimes that are necessary to satisfy, but that makes it a little bit less of a sexy problem. But what's good is I'd encourage people not to go reinvent the wheel. You've got a way of dealing with this today. Think about it as the business problem. Think about it as the decision. Think of the risk in terms of its impact in those two things, and then apply the processes you have. Granted, dealing with a Gen AI algorithm is difficult than dealing with a linear regression or something like that. Like these are new and different, but the same sort of processes that have the thoughtful people thinking along the way about how that should be done. That's where the governance needs to happen. Wishful thinking about we're going to find some really intricate prompt engineering tool, and that'll mean it'll be fine to use Gen AI in a whole bunch of cases. That's dreamy. That's not going to happen.
It's not remotely realistic,
yeah.
Right? So the best explanation I've heard for what real AI is, and Gen AI I would put in this category, is it's you talking to a computer, and that computer talks to a computer that only it can see and only it can communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the challenge is, no matter what you ask the first computer, it's never going to give you the insight into the second computer.
This is like a new double Turing test.
It
And
it kind of is.
Yeah,
It is,
right.
right.
Yeah.
So if you think
We keep on moving the goalposts, by the way,
we
right?
do,
It's like you just had to be 50-50, is it human or computer? Now it's like, well, you need a computer talking to a computer. So we need an API, we
right.
need a different interface. Like we're setting a new bar. It's good. That means we're progressing.
Sure. And then you get into agentic, where it's a computer talking to a different computer, 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 interpreting the results from the fifth computer.
Yeah.
Right.
That's going to be a nightmare. Exciting the way it should be done. There's lots of reasons. It allows you to, segment. It's a typical enterprise architecture, right? This is like microservices
Yes,
yet
yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Make sure surface area more monitorable. But we all know there's emergent complexity from these simple systems, and I just think that's going to be a little bit of a different nightmare.
Complete another nightmare.
A complete and utter nightmare.
Right?
Yeah.
I was at GitHub Universe this week.
Yeah.
Great place to be to talk about AI. They released their kind of models function, which allows you to swap out the default model for Copilot into any of the models they support, which I want to say is like 38 of them right now, 37 of them right now. That list is not likely to get shorter. That list is likely to just get longer, right?
Yeah.
So at some point,
for a while, and then there'll be consolidation, I think.
I disagree.
Okay.
And the reason I disagree is because we're going to start to see, rather than just kind of LLMs that are general purpose, we're starting to see a lot more bespoke models. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think we're going to see fewer kind of general purpose models as that kind of starts to settle a little bit. But then I think we're going to start to see a massive uptick, and rightly so, in specific purpose models. And then your
small language models as well.
Yeah. Small and medium language models, right? That are much more purpose built, which I think is going to be a really interesting kind of thing. How do we manage it? How do we grade it? How do we validate it? And that still doesn't mean that we need to be building our own models, right? Because we're still, your legal team's going to want to leverage a legal model. There's absolutely no reason, and it would be counterproductive for them to build one themselves.
Oh yeah.
Right. Your doctors may need, your cardiovascular surgeon may need a cardiovascular model, right? Your whatever, your pharmacist, whatever, right? So all of that's going to have to happen, and there's going to be competing models. I think it's real dangerous to get to the point where there's four, right, or some small number. The large number helps. Plus, like, a lot of the models are really designed to help manage the hardware limitations, because this stuff is expensive.
Oh yeah.
Right. So the same base model with, 2 billion, 7 billion, and 108 billion inputs is drastically different. Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's also going to be a piece of that that's going to last for a long time to help manage some of the cost difference. And so we also have to get to the point where we can govern the models and measure the efficacy and quality of the output and start making recommendations around what actually makes sense for this use case. Because really, you need to stop using that 107 billion. What's the term?
I think you've just stumbled into maturity level 2 here. I really observe and manage to a metric. That sounds like maturity level 2. I love it.
Yeah. Because the risk is the risk of AI is exponentially higher than traditional risk. So while we can manage it fundamentally, start from the same place, do the same things that we've already done, we absolutely should do that. Don't start looking at, well, I can't do anything with AI because I don't know how to govern it. Yeah, you do. You govern data today. Govern it the same way. Right? Look for opportunities to improve your overall governance due to AI.
Totally.
Right. But then also recognize that AI doesn't have a linear cost model. That's also a risk that needs to be governed.
Yep.
Right. AI doesn't have a simple input output that you can track. Right. There's no human alive that can tell you why you got that specific output to a high level of detail. At some point, they just create a box that says unknown, right? Black, and then move on, right? Because it is a black box. It goes into here and something else comes out. If that wasn't true, then you get the same output each time. You never get the same output each time. You can even OpenAI, the best they could do was we can give you a flag where you're telling the AI you effectively want a similar output, and it's similar, but it's not the same.
Yep.
Right? These are black boxes. And so you also have to go into it knowing this is a black box and will always be a black box.
Yep.
Right.
And it's interesting because that prompts me, pun intended, to think about sort of recapitulating what we're saying in a different way. The idea of it being a black box, that's a really good method for thinking about governance. Like forget what the black box does. How do you in your business govern black boxes? And businesses deal with lots of black boxes. They deal with market trends and they deal with competitors and all these things are in some way black boxes. And that's an interesting way to think about the models. And that should give you intuition about how to set up a governance process and also intuition about why it's not about trying to noodle in the black box and trying to figure out how to reduce hallucinations. It's about using that in your overall system architecture and managing it as though it's a black box. That's really good. I like that.
Think about it like the interview process that you go through, right? All HR can do is manage the inputs and outputs of the corporate representative.
Yep.
Here's the things you're allowed to do. Here's the things you're not allowed to do. If someone does this, you can do this, but you can't do that. If someone does this, you can do this, but you can't do that. Right? You can't control the response of the person being interviewed. They don't work for you. You have no control over it. Plus, totally. Even within the context of the rules, you have very little control over what happens in that conversation, in that room, in that box. If you think about it the same way, you're probably in a good position, right? The best places to apply governance are on the data that you're going to use, the policy that you create, and managing and having checks and controls over the on-ramps and off-ramps, the inputs and the outputs.
Yep.
Right? So that if AI does give you something back, you've got something that checks and goes, well, what is the chance that this is a hallucination? And is the person receiving this output allowed to receive this output? Right? It's those sort of things. Stop thinking about, can I control every step? You can't control every step of anything that you do. So just think about it like an interview. What would I do to set someone up for maximum success in an interview and not add risk to the company? And very much that's a lot of this. It's a lot of finger crossing. It's a lot of hope, but that's okay. Right? You can still do that with AI.
I like the idea of thinking about a recruiter as a prompt engineer for a candidate. This is a good idea. I mean, the best recruiters do that. That's good insight. I like that.
For sure. So as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, this is the space that you work in. This is the space you spend a time in, and you talk to a lot of big companies that are further down the path than the kind of average bear. What are 3 takeaways that you would give to someone listening to this that can help them on this journey?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, I mean, first of all, we really believe in don't reinvent the wheel in some sense that like there's some whole new type of governance regime that's required. It's about bringing a new technology into your current regime. And I think that like if you use that as guidance, I think it'll save you a lot of heartache and a lot of time and a lot of money paying consultants to like blow smoke about new types of governance. The second piece that we strongly believe is that there's a moment here. Like there are these traditional model development governance regimes. You've got SR 11.7 model risk management and banking. Insurance companies are doing model governance, all that sort of stuff. And there's 2 main trends going on. One is like we are jamming more AI through the pipe. These model, Gen AI is one piece of it, but even the demands on these teams have become so much more over the past couple of years as the data science wave has come out of the trough of disillusionment. It is now, widespread everywhere. Like that's really been a change from statistics to real, data science techniques. And now AI is just layering that on top. And our belief is that there's it's time to take a real look at how your governance processes work today. We talk to customers who take, 4 to 7 months to get models through a governance cycle. That's just not okay. Your model decays, the world has changed. It's not right. So, there's a ripe opportunity to revisit that. And we believe the key is bringing development and technologists closer with governance folks, and that's going to be really the way to see through that. And then, the last thing that we strongly believe is, and the last advice I'd have is risk-based approach. It's always got to be risk-based. And again, to recapitulate some of the points, I mean, start from the observation of the decision and the impact on the business, and then use that to feed, well, how much governance do I really need here, as sort of an overlay on your whole, I'm sure everybody has a Gen AI transformational effort underway. That's an important lens to do the prioritization of your projects and the review of your projects on top of ROI and all of that. So
that's great. Well, this has been a lot of fun.
I agree.
You made me think of a bunch of new things in a new way that I hadn't thought of before. So
ditto.
This was fantastic.
Ditto.
I hope you'll come back on in 6 months or a year. As fast as this stuff changes, I'm sure we'll have plenty more to talk about.
Absolutely. I hope so. And I'd love to be back.
Great. Well, this has been another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. As always, I'm Howard Holton. If you would like, share, comment, subscribe, do the needful for us, help us grow, help us, do more and more and more of these. If there's a topic you'd like covered, if you'd like to be on, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll see you on our next episode.